University of Wisconsin, Eau Claire.
Beer, a work of art, technology, and tradition. A simple mixture of water, malted barley, and hops. Simple, that is, until the magic of yeast is added. At that point, the water and grain become a living thing. There's a great turmoil of activity as this liquid ferments. Because yeast produces this reaction, the makers of beer must be knowledgeable technicians who are skilled at their trade. And they must be artists, sensitive to color, taste, and clarity. Beer has appeased our thirst since prehistoric times. Early man found that when he allowed a mixture of water and grain to ferment, he produced a pleasant-tasting drink that brought on an exhilarating feeling and was often safer to drink than water. While beer in its many variations was produced in family homes for centuries, we generally credit medieval Germany with the development of large-scale production and distribution of beer. Breweries in the 14th century in Munich and Hamburg introduced the use of hops, an herb that helped to clarify and preserve the beer, as well as give it the somewhat bitter taste we're familiar with today. In the mid-1800s, German breweries began to experiment with new yeasts and lower fermenting temperatures. Brewers used a yeast that would sink to the bottom of the tank during the fermentation period, producing a clearer beer. They also found that a second stage of fermentation done at a low temperature for a long period of time produced a more full-bodied beer. This method of lagering, storing, or maturing is still used in today's breweries. The Germans brought their love of beer and their knowledge of brewing to America during the great immigration period of the 1800s. Wisconsin offered these new Americans employment in lumbering, mining, and in urban industry. The Northwoods drew many young Germans looking for work with lumber companies. When their families and relatives joined them, new communities were formed and breweries set up. Because the lack of refrigeration prohibited wide distribution of beer, at least one brewery could be found in most communities. Nearly 126 breweries were operating in Wisconsin around 1914. The making of beer tended to be a family business, handed down from generation to generation. Today's beers still carry the names of families who have a long heritage of brewing. At the point where the Chippewa River met the Eau Claire River, a lumbering community began to grow. The strong German heritage was evident in that by 1872, there had been 7 breweries in the Eau Claire area. Eau Claire has seen breweries come and go, but today only one remains to carry on the tradition. The Walter Brewing Company has been a family business for 3 generations. The Walter family began their work in the breweries of Germany. Political unrest in Europe during the 1880s led to the emigration of the Jacob Walter family. Jacob's sons carried their brewing experience with them to their new homes in Wisconsin. Jacob Jr., George, John, and Christian opened breweries in Wisconsin while brother Martin moved to Colorado to brew beer. John opened his Eau Claire brewery in 1890, where it prospered until Prohibition shut the doors on all breweries. In 1932, 1 year before the repeal of Prohibition, John died. The building and equipment stood idle for 7 years until John's nephews reopened the plant and carried on the family's tradition. Edgar Walter moved to Eau Claire to oversee the production of Walter's beer. His sons and grandsons are still brewing beer. Today, the great-nephews of John Walter carry on the tradition of brewing beer. Dr. Carl Walter is presently the chairman of the board of directors for Walter's Beer. Charles Walter is the company's president, and John Walter is the brewmeister for Walter's.
There was 5 brothers, wasn't there, what started?
There were 5 brothers. There were 6 breweries involved in the family at one time. John's brewery is the only one left. one we have here.
And you think that each of us was born in a different area, and now we're here in Eau Claire with the last of the Walter breweries, when there were 5 originally. Charlie was in West Bend, and you were born right here, John, right?
Here in Eau Claire.
I was born in Appleton. Of course, that's where George Walter started the brewery. Our father was
That was our grandfather.
our grandfather, right?
Where were the other breweries? Exactly.
Well, let's see. You had West
One in
Bend.
West Bend was not an original Walter brewery, but the two, Martin and my dad had that one, you know. And then there was the one in Menasha with Chris and Jake, and then Grandpa's up in Appleton, and then the one in Pueblo, and there was a Pueblo Trinidad Association.
And also the one in Eau Claire.
And the Eau Claire. So it actually involved 6 breweries.
And here we are now, when you think about it, taking the places of our fathers. John, you're a brewmaster. Your great uncle was a brewmaster, and Charlie, your dad was a brewery president. My father was chairman of the board for a while, and we're history repeating itself.
And to look at the brewery today, Carl, as compared to years ago when I lived here in the John Walter House, which of course was 1941, I was 3 or 4 years old. But the difference in the old brewery versus what it looks like today, with the old malt house there in the corner of Hobart and Elm Street, and of course the old bottle shop before the new one was built, and then the renovation that has been done at the brewery in the recent years.
So a lot of things have been put in there. A lot of money has gone back into that plant.
When you think of what's gone on from wooden vats to stainless steel, all the transformation going through the glass-lined to now the stainless steel, the inline cleaning, the sanitation, pasteurization improvements that are present.
Well, then you think, go back and when you remember, of course, I think you and I can, I don't know if John can, where they had hand corked the bottles, hand labeled the corks, and things like that.
I don't remember the old hand cork bottles. I've seen pictures of them, Charlie, but I remember them driving the old corks into the kegs, of course, where they put the spigot in.
Yeah.
And you think of what's happening to packaging. You know, we've gotten to the
goodness gracious.
aluminum barrels and the cans and the
Stainless steel tanks.
right. Yeah, you talk about the old wood that had to be pitched, and what a job that was, just keeping up.
Well, the old wooden cases.
We had a full-time Cooper. Didn't you at the?
Yes, there was a Cooper shop, and they had a Cooper.
I remember that down there.
Old Frank Ross. Yes,
That was a
yeah.
skilled trade. It still is to this
Yes,
day.
it is.
Very few people are involved in it, but it's a very skilled, highly skilled.
I can remember
trade.
taking an axe down there and having him sharpen it for me once, and you could shave the hair off the back of your hand on it.
Remember how you, well, I don't suppose you had to coat any tanks, but how you had to get in there and
Oh yes, I
take a
coated.
paintbrush and coat tanks,
I was scraping first.
scrape them first and then coat them.
You know, one thing about our business too, I think one of the reasons why we're still alive is because of the kind of man John Walter was. You know, you read the old records of his death and his obituary and the things that were said about him, that he was a community-minded citizen. He did well to all the people in the community, and many, many people know of his benevolence. And I think that he was recognized of a man of great honesty and sincerity.
Character.
Yeah,
Yes,
character.
He was,
right.
he was very community-minded.
And when when Prohibition was repealed, I think the people were ready for John. Again, unfortunately, his death occurred to our fortune because it brought us together. But
There's some unfortunate things that follow good fortune, I guess, and you can't change those things.
first thing I remember, I was 9 years old in Appleton, and they brought back a case of beer from Eau Claire, and it was the old wooden case with the wooden tops and 16-ounce bottles. I remember that, and we were all, it seemed like Eau Claire was halfway to Alaska, and they talked about the snow being halfway up to the wires, and it was going to be a great adventure.
One thing I remember, Charlie, on Sundays, we always had a big meal on Sunday. And my father, everybody had beer at the table. Everybody had a bottle of beer. And as a little shaver, it was my job to bring the 7 or 8 bottles of beer and set them alongside of his chair. And we said grace, and my father would open up the beer and he'd pass everybody a bottle of beer. And I can remember very distinctly living in this house.
That's a wonderful memory, too. I'm sure you people have some fine memories there.
I think one of the most remarkable things is that we are still a viable brewery when you think of what's happened since we were kids. When I was working in the brewery as a young man, going to high school in the summertime, there was over 80 breweries in the state of Wisconsin. Now there's 8.
There's
6.
8, yeah.
There isn't even 8, is there?
No, now there's only 7 because of the Schlitz
yeah,
Stroh
7.
merger.
Every small town had a brewery.
Well,
I think of Bloomer and Fountain City and
Portage
Arcadia
and Madison and
just around here, though. I'm just saying for how close around here, you know. And now there's just a few left.
And it's strange that there's 2 of them so close together.
Yes.
In this area. I think we've been very fortunate myself.
That you've been able to survive through that era. Yeah.
From the time Prohibition ended, why, it's come a long ways, and there's been a lot of demise of the.
You know, we've talked about it, all 3 of us have talked about it. It was probably the foresightedness of our brother George, in renovating the brewery and putting in the modern equipment that he put in.
Carl.
Yeah,
I don't think there's any question about it. So a lot of my friends that went broke just had to shut down because they didn't have them.
Well, you know, in a small brewery, it takes so doggone long, you know, to make your beer. I remember a few years ago I was talking with a colleague of mine who is also brewmaster, and we were talking about the cost of a glass of beer at a dime. But if we went right back and started with the farmer planting the corn, and the farmer planting the barley, and the hop farmers planting the hops, and the right down to the brewery, and bringing it to the brewery, and then the brewery processing this under the direction of a brewmaster and making a good glass of beer, and then the storage time that it takes, putting it in a keg and delivering it to the tavern or saloon, however, for a dime.
Those days are gone, I'm afraid.
Yes, they are.
And you...
The days of making a good glass of beer are not gone,
No, that's right. No.
Oh, and you know what automation goes on in the big breweries.
Yes.
You know that it's all done by push buttons, but...
Well, there's no question that they can put out a barrel of beer much cheaper than we can with just their plain automation.
Well,
but they haven't got as good a control, I don't think.
They've got
beer
just
as we have.
high-speed
That's
equipment that they run at anywhere from 1,800 to 2,000 cans a minute. We run at 180.
And you know, and even in our small brewery, we're limited to what we can make, how much beer we can make because of the way that you brew it. You just...
That's pretty hard to set, Carl. I think you're saying, you know, that's like asking us what's the capacity of the brewery. I think they put out a good product, good brewery fresh beer that'll really stand up.
Stand the test, yeah.
Yeah, right. I think that with our 9-week program that we have from the brew kettle to the bottling, canning, or kegging is really nice, because I remember at Lone Star Brewing Company, why we were making beer from the brew kettle to the bottle in 10 days. So if you're talking capacity, I would say, with the shoes that I wear down there as brewmaster, if you wanted more capacity, we would have to build onto the brewery.
Well, I know something, John, for sure. The beer that you make is good because I've drank it. That's been sitting 2 years in a basement, and it was good. It was good beer, and I know that you can't do that to any other beer.
Well,
I've never
you.
seen one.
Thank you.
Well, I certainly get a lot of compliments on our beer wherever you are, and I know it's...
When you talk about 9 weeks now, you're talking about the aging process.
Aging process,
Right.
from the time we started the brew kettle until it's delivered to the...
Get ready to go on the market, and that's why it's such good beer.
The brewing process starts early in the morning. We try to coincide our bottling with the brewing for the conservation of energy. The main ingredients for the making of Walter's beer is the malted barley, the corn grits, the hops, yeast, and water. The brewer first crushes the malt, or just barely opens the berry by the use of a malt mill. This is then weighed according to batch size, along with the corn grits, and added to the mash tub. Okay, with the controlled amount of water in the mash tub, we then add the grains, where through various temperature changes, the starches are converted to fermentable sugars and dextrins. After the final temperature rise, the wort is then drawn off or decanted off by gravity, delivering it to the brew kettle. As the liquid drops in the mash tub, we sparge or add additional water to remove completely all of the extract. As the kettle begins to fill, the addition of hops then begins. A vigorous boil is very important at this time to extract the bitterness units and add aroma to the wort. After boiling, which takes approximately an hour and 15 minutes, we strike the brew kettle, or knock the brew kettle out, dropping the wort to the hop strainer. The function of the hop strainer being to remove the suspended hops. The wort then passes through the cooler, delivering the chilled wort to the fermenting tank. At this point, the yeast is then added, absorbing the fermentable sugars, giving off carbon dioxide and alcohol. Just before the addition of the yeast, it is washed, skimmed, and filtered. The process of fermenting at the Walter Brewing Company is 7 to 9 days. As the gas comes off of the fermenter, it is collected and stored for use at a later date. At this point, the wort is now called beer. After the 9 days of fermentation, the beer is then dropped to the lagering cellar. It passes through a cooler, dropping the temperature of the beer to 29 degrees Fahrenheit. The beer lays in the lagering tanks, meaning laid to rest for a period of time, from 21 to 30 days, where a natural aging process takes place. At the peak of maturity, and after tasting, and on its way to the finishing cellar, the beer then is passed through primary filtration, using the diatomite as a filtering media, filtering out suspended yeasts that have not settled out in lagering. After the beer passes a series of tests for quality, color, and taste, and reaches its peak of perfection, it is carbonated. Only then does the brewmaster release the beer for kegging, bottling, and canning. Now let's first go to the packaging or the racking of keg beer, which is commonly termed as the racking cellar. Before we fill the kegs have to be debunged, washed, fresh water rinses, and then a final inspection. The keg is then visually inspected inside and out, and then delivered to the racking cellar for filling.
The bottling department is very similar to the racking of the keg beer at Walters. The cases come in on pallets, are depalletized. The case is delivered to our bottle washer where the bottles are removed from the case. The case is manually inspected and cleaned. The bottles travel through a 5-compartment bottle washer, 4 of a heavy caustic solution, where the labels are removed and the bottles are sterilized. Then each bottle is electronically inspected for cleanliness prior to bottle filling. As a bottle reaches the filler or the filling station, it is counter-pressured, the bottle is filled, is allowed to overflow or jetted to get the airspace out, crowned, rinsed, and is ready for pasteurization. Now the reason for pasteurization is to raise the temperature of the beer coming off the filler at 32 degrees up to 140 degrees Fahrenheit, and then dropping the temperature again to our cold water temperature coming into the brewery at 58 degrees. The reason for pasteurization is to give the beer shelf life. A double check is made prior to labeling. One being the temperature settings on the side of the pasteurizer for the heat of the water. The second being a traveling recorder, which travels through the pasteurizer, showing the brewmaster and the bottling shop superintendent that the beer has been properly pasteurized. As the bottles leave the pasteurizer, they are visually inspected for any foreign matter or broken or cracked bottles prior to the labeling. After the labelers, the bottles are transferred down the bottling line and packaged 24 bottles to a case. Canning at Walters begins with depalletizing of the empty cans. This is done through a waterfall type operation where the cans are put on a hydraulic lift. The cans are pushed off into a running conveyor, traveling across and through the can rinser prior to filling. The cans then are counter-pressured and filled. Jetted, and then enters the closing machine where the lid is put on. The can then goes through the pasteurizer and undergoes the same temperature changes and the same quality control checks as the bottles. At the discharge of the pasteurizer, the can then enters a can weighing machine. This ensures us at Walters that there are 12 ounces of beer in each can. As the can proceeds on down the canning line, it is then either 12-packed or 6-packed, palletized and ready for distribution.
The family tradition of many small breweries was nearly eradicated by Prohibition. While thousands of American breweries were shut down by Prohibition, only about 750 were able to reopen in 1933. Small, local breweries are again facing extinction. While a few large beer companies seek to dominate the market, the small ones go under, unable to compete or to increase their production capabilities. In order to remain viable, regional breweries pay careful attention to the distinctive flavor of their beers. Satisfaction of their local clientele is far more important than shipping beer across the nation. As Bill Leinenkugel of the Jacob Leinenkugel Brewing Company of Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin says, "We can't outproduce them, we can't out-advertise them, so we just brew a better beer." Wisconsin's 4 regional breweries, Leinenkugel, Huber, Stevens Point, and Walters, are alive today because of their German tradition of brewing a quality beer and because of a loyal clientele that continues to support the distinctive qualities of their beer.
Your local people are the ones who make your brewery successful. It's it's their feeling of pride in a local industry and their willingness to support it that makes you successful. If you lost that, you'd lose your brewery.
That's right.
You could sell beer in Newark, New Jersey, or you could sell beer in Jacksonville, Florida, but it's what you sell around Eau Claire that counts.
Yeah,
and we know that.
That's true, it's the people up here that are going to keep us going. I don't think there's...
You'll get a spurt of interest occasionally from an area where they'd like a nice, fresh, clean glass of beer, but you're still going to have to rely on your local people to give you the support.
That's right. But most of the inquiries you get, Carl, you're aware of it, so is John, most of the inquiries we get from out of state or someplace like that, or they want a cheap beer. Well, we just won't make it for them.
No.
Our price is our price. John isn't going to destroy a good product just to...
Well, you have the opportunity, you have the equipment, you have the essence to make good beer. There's no reason to make anything less.